Before Yi Futian and Yu Sheng had arrived, the three forces had already stopped fighting. But even though they had tried, they had been unable to get closer to the area covered by the fighting will. Otherwise, they would have already taken the spear and inherited the fighting will. Before Yi Futian and Yu Sheng had arrived, the three forces had already stopped fighting. But even though they had tried, they had been unable to get closer to the area covered by the fighting will. Otherwise, they would have already taken the spear and inherited the fighting will. But now, Yi Futian had done both of those things incredibly quickly. Dou Zhao suddenly felt a little bit inferior. He now understood why it had been Yi Futian who had inherited the fighting will and not Yu Sheng. Could this even be called inheritance? It seemed like the spear had been placed there to wait for Yi Futian to take it. As for how he had taken it, Dou Zhao suddenly remembered how Yi Futian had told them to leave. It seemed that he purposely did not want them to see what he did. But no matter what trick he had used, he had done it incredibly quickly. Where are you planning to go next? Dou Zhao asked Yi Futian. To the east. Many people seem to be going somewhere in that direction. It seems like something happened, said Yi Futian. The cultivators of the Purple Gold Rat clan had gone out in many directions. This was not the only place where things were happening. They were happening in other directions as well. The demons of the Purple Gold Rat clan had some tricks of their own, and their sense of smell was very sharp. The god's relic has a lot of history. Many of the elders of the top forces have been here before, so they probably know some things about this place, just like the school of the Emperor Star, said Dou Zhao. The cultivators of the Dou tribe were not the first ones to come here. Those cultivators who had made it out alive had naturally recorded their experiences of what happened in the god's relic. Otherwise, how would they have known to follow the school of the Emperor Star? Yi Futian gave a slight nod. However, there is something I should remind you of, said Dou Zhao. Yi Futian nodded. Go ahead. According to what the elder of my tribe said, if you continue on in one direction until you reach the end, you will run into the great relic. A look of surprise flashed in Yi Futian's eyes. When they had followed the purple gold rats, they had seen that many forces were indeed traveling in a single direction and not stopping. Was the great relic something that had truly been left behind by the gods? The gods' relic seemed to be an entire world, and was said to be the tomb of the gods. But could it have been rebuilt? Yi Futian nodded again. Then, I will go into the east to have a look first, after which I will continue on eastward. When Yi Futian said this, Dou Zhao seemed to realize something, and a strange look came over his face. If you are here, then how do you know where the others are going? The more he learned about Yi Futian, the stranger he felt. What kind of person was this man? At first, it had seemed that these two had just been secretly following behind them, trying to take advantage of the situation. Now they somehow seemed to know what was happening in other places. From Yi Futian's tone, it sounded like he even knew concrete details about what was going on. Yi Futian looked at Dou Zhao and smiled. I am using the mystical powers of the Great Path to foresee everything, both in the past and in the future. Dou Zhao's face went dark. He didn't have to tell him, but did he really have to lie so obviously? He may have been very powerful, but was there anyone in the world who would dare claim to have the power to see the past and the future? You rest here for a while. We'll go on ahead. Yi Futian was naturally joking. He took his leave and began walking off into the distance. Dou Zhao watched the disappearing figure speechlessly. The cultivators of the Dou tribe beside him looked at him and asked, How are you? I need a bit more time to recover. After saying this, Dou Zhao closed his eyes and said no more. The piece of fruit of the way that contained powerful life will was truly marvelous. It was not only able to restore his life aura, but it was also able to repair his damaged spiritual willpower. The fruit contained the power of the great path of life, and had infinite vitality. This was the basis of all human beings. When their vitality was strong, their spiritual will would be strong as well. The two of them were connected. When one's life aura, or vitality grew weak, their spiritual will would grow weak as well. This is why when people were wounded in battle, it was easier to destroy their willpower. Thus, due to this fruit, although they might have to stay behind for a little while, it would not be too long. Now he just had to patiently recover. Those two guys did not know what kind of storm they had just whipped up in the god's relic. He would guess that those two were the greatest dark horses here. He did not know who would be unlucky enough to run into the two of them next. The entrance to the god's relic was in the City of the Ruins, which was in the Central Emperor realm. Thus, if you wanted to talk about who understood the god's relic the best, you would have to mention the top forces of the Central Imperial realm. These powers were ancient and prosperous with vast and deep secrets. Thus, they were certainly among the forces that understood the god's relic the most. Other than them, there were also the powerful elders of other top forces who had been to the god's relic before. They probably knew a little bit more. Thus, when they entered the god's relic, those forces who knew some things could head directly for their goals. For example, the School of the Emperor Star had done this, and the Dou tribe and the clan of the Seven Slayers had followed them. The other forces besides the School of the Emperor Star would naturally know some things about the god's relic. For example, the Yuanyang clan, Heavenly Sword Hall, and other forces had all headed directly east once they had reached the god's relic. The Yuanyang clan's formation was incredibly large. After all, they controlled the Yuanyang realm, and thus all the cultivators of that realm were their subjects, and had depended on them to have a chance to come to the god's relic. Thus, once they had come here, they formed a massive and imposing formation. Zhu Qi, who had once been with Little Condor, was one of the people who came from the Yuanyang realm. At that moment, the massive crowd of people was standing outside of an ancient city. The city's gates were broken, and there were no signs of life from within. But as they stood there outside the city, the cultivators of the Yuanyang realm looked solemn. The entire massive city was covered by sword will. They could sense that the city had been pierced by countless swords, all of which seemed elegant yet insubstantial. They were all made out of sword will. This was an ancient city of swordsmanship. A great swordsman must have once ruled over it. Another force appeared outside the city in another spot. It was the cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall of the Myriad Realm. There were not as many of them as there were of the people from the Yuanyang realm, but every one of their swordsmen had a terrifying aura of swordsmanship, and they were gazing at the city fiercely. They had felt the sword will hear from far away. In another spot, another group of imposing figures stood there. They seemed to shine with divine sunlight, and they were very swift and fierce. These cultivators had come from the solar realm, and were one of the top forces of that realm. Qishao Divine Mountain. Although they were not purely focused on swordsmanship, they did teach it, and thus they had come here. In addition, a force from the Heavenly Mandate Realm had come as well. They were a group of women, Brahma's pure sky. Qinhe was leading them. They stood a little bit farther back than the other forces. Brahma's pure sky was one of the top forces in the Heavenly Mandate realm. But in reality, the Heavenly Mandate dynasty and the Celestial Gate of Vast Heaven were the strongest. The Demon realm had the Divine Dragons and the Sky Demon Court. Thus, Brahma's pure sky was not at the very top. When looking at the whole of the 9 supreme realms, they did not stand out very much. Thus, Qinhe knew what she should do and what she should not do. Be careful when we go in. The whole city is filled with sword will. The young man at the head of the Yuanyang clan was wearing a robe and had an impressive bearing. After he reminded everyone of this, he strode forward towards the ancient city. Everyone was very vigilant. It was said that many people had fallen here in the past, and the sword will that was anywhere could threaten their very lives. Afterward, the people from the Heavenly Sword Hall and Qishao Divine Mountain entered the city as well. "Let's go in," ordered Qinhe of Brahma's pure sky. The goddesses all stepped forward one by one, entering within. Once they had entered the city, sword will wrapped around them. Only powerful cultivators could protect themselves against sword will that was everywhere at once. They let it enter their bodies, so they could sense it better. Outside the city, another group of figures was coming towards the city from a distance. There were 2 figures at the very front. They were Yi Futian and Yu Sheng. Behind them came Little Condor and the others. Although Dou Zhao had told him that the great relic was at the end of this road, he was not just going to give up on the other things that he found along the way. "Should we go in?" Yu Sheng asked Yi Futian beside him. "If there are no Renhuangs, then there are no threats," answered Yi Futian. If there's anyone in there we can't handle together, we can flee. There were many sword cultivators among them. The swordmaster of Lihan, Yaya, Luoyue and more. He himself had cultivated the sword, and thus he had decided to come there. Moreover, not long before, he had gotten a new spear and inherited some fighting will. If no Renhuangs appeared, it would be difficult for anyone to threaten him and Yu Sheng. When he and Yu Sheng had fought Do Zhao, and he had activated the seventh seal, that had been the most challenging battle they would face. But the sword will in this city is extremely strong. You should all be careful, said Yi Futian to the people behind him. Yaya and the others nodded. When Yi Futian looked back at the city, his expression changed, becoming surprised. It seemed as if he could see through the illusion. The whole city from top to bottom was filled with sword will. There was nowhere left untouched. It filled the whole city. Moreover, the farther one went into the city, the stronger the sword will became. He could faintly see some Lingtian sword will. Yi Futian and the others strode forward, passing through the broken city wall. As they entered the city, they saw that everything was in ruins. In addition to the surging sword will, there were countless sword marks left everywhere. Yi Futian did not resist. He let the sword will enter him. More sword will spread out from him at the same time. This sword will is all different. It is actually many different kinds of sword will. The sword master of Lihan whispered. The sword will had obviously come from different people. There are many broken swords here as well, said Yaya as she looked all around her. There were broken swords everywhere, stuck into the ruins. They were all filled with sword will, and had very likely been left here by an ancient sword emperor. But they could not see any corpses here. There was one possibility. They had been destroyed by the sword will. Yi Futian walked a little further in, and grasped one of the broken swords. He could feel the sword will within it. The swords are broken, and the people are dead, he said. But the people are gone, and the sword will remains. In the past, these broken swords would have been extremely valuable to him. But at his current level they were useless. Let's go to the center of the city, said Yi Futian as he continued forward. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Sword City was barren and dead silent, but also had an incredibly tense atmosphere. There was sword will everywhere. Sword City was barren and dead silent, but also had an incredibly tense atmosphere. There was sword will everywhere. Yi Futian had already forged a sword body of the Great Path, so the sword will could not affect him. But many of the people behind him had to actively resist it. The whole city is locked down by sword will. What was left here? Whispered Yi Futian. If an apocalyptic war had broken out here in the past, the ruler of the city must have left something behind before he died, which is why he had made the sword will covering the city not dissipate even after thousands of years. He wanted to seal it here. Perhaps it was just to remind future generations that he had once lived. Yaya pointed and said, "There is a sword over there." Yi Futian saw it as well. Off in the distance, there was a sword floating in midair. Sword will was falling all around it, forming a terrifying matrix of swordsmanship. The sword will was particularly strong there, much stronger than the sword will where they were standing. However, the people who had entered the city before them seemed to be much more focused on the Lingtian sword will, and they were all heading in that direction. Yi Futian and the others continued on through the ruins. Powerful sword will would occasionally pass in front of them. "Follow me," said Yi Futian to those behind him. "Only walk where I walk. Do not stray from the path." Everyone nodded. They had discovered that killing sword will would sometimes fall on them. Some people who had been ahead of them had already been hit, as they found bloodstains on the ground. But there were no bodies. They had been completely destroyed by the sword will. Judging by the bloodstains, they had died not long ago. "This is getting more and more dangerous," whispered Yi Futian. His eyes were like those of a god, able to pierce through all illusions. Moreover, he had the ability to sense danger in advance. Thus, they had been able to avoid all danger so far. Up ahead, a large group of figures had stopped, and were not continuing on into the city. There were cultivators from the Yuanyang clan, the Heavenly Sword Hal, and Qishao Divine Mountain there, as well as some from Brahma's pure sky. They were missing a few people, and some of the people who were there were wounded. When Yi Futian and the others reached them, all eyes turned on them. Many of them recognized him, as he had once come into conflict with the Heavenly Sword Hall because of the Swordmaster of Lihan, and had fought the people of the Yuanyang clan for Little Condor. It was only the people of Qishao Divine Mountain that he had never come in contact with. Have you been here before? The young head of the Yuanyang clan asked Yi Futian. They naturally knew there would be people behind them. Previously they had not cared, but they had discovered that Yi Futian had marvelous means of avoiding danger. Thus, they had stopped to wait for him. I have not, said Yi Futian. No. The young head of the Yuanyang clan was named Yuan Hong. A look of doubt came over his face when he heard Yi Futian's denial. How did you avoid the danger then? I can predict threats, answered Yi Futian. Then may we walk with you? Asked Yuan Hong. Then we can share all our adventures. The people from Qishao Divine Mountain and the Heavenly Sword Hall were looking at him as well. If he didn't agree, then something would happen here that was worthy of a story. Yi Futian thought for a moment, then smiled and nodded. All right, all of you may follow me. Thank you. Yuan Hong had not thought that Yi Futian would answer so sincerely. He smiled in appreciation. Yi Futian and the others continued forward through the crowd, with Zhu Qi staring at him and Little Condor. Previously, Yu Sheng's power had shocked her, and she would never have thought that they would come here. She did not know what was going to happen. Long time no see, Lord Yi, said Qin He of Brahma's pure sky with a nod. Many of the other goddesses of Brahma's pure sky beside her looked at Yi Futian as well. He was obviously very familiar to Qin He. Her memories of the Battle of Brahma's Sky City were still fresh. You are looking even more elegant than before, Goddess Qin, said Yi Futian. Qin He nodded. Yi Futian was walking in front of the whole group. The people from the other forces were a bit surprised. They had not thought that they might know each other, and it seemed like they were in fact relatively close. However, Yi Futian's formation was really quite weak. Divine light was still shining in Yi Futian's eyes as he led them through Sword City. After a while, they reached the center of the city. There was a sword palace there, in front of which stood a huge sword matrix. Countless swords were there, blocking the entrance. Hundreds of feet above the sword matrix, there was another sword floating in the air, with many beams of light shooting out of it in all directions. This was where the sword wool was coming from. Some of the people's faces darkened. The sword wool here had put them under a lot of pressure, so much that it had been difficult to bear. They could faintly see a faint and blurry figure sitting on the sword. It was probably the leftover will from the ruler of the city. Some people have already been here, said Yu Sheng. There were 6 swords stuck into the sword eyes around the sword matrix, leaving sword marks that stretched out in all directions and made the sword matrix light up in many places. This had clearly all been done by people who had come here before. However, the matrix was missing 3 sword eyes and 3 swords. If they had been taken, it probably would have undone the matrix. Of course they have. Some of our elders have been to these ruins before and told us about this place. If we can find the last 3 swords and put them in the matrix, perhaps we can then inherit the swords themselves. Yuan Hong looked up at the sword floating in the air. That sword is not as simple as it looks. Perhaps the inheritance of the swordsman who ruled this city lies within it. If that's so, then we should go find the last 3 swords, said Yi Futian. Yuan Hong nodded. We will go look for them together. We will activate the sword matrix and see whether or not we can make an adventure out of this. Yuan Hong was a leader of the Yuanyang clan, but he spoke in a friendly manner, without the least hint of arrogance. Moreover, everything seemed very harmonious here. There was no conflict. However, this was probably because the ruins were locked down and had not opened up yet. It was also probably because the Yuanyang clan was the strongest force here. Right now, Yuan Hong's only goal was to open the ruins. Once that happened, it was most likely that they would be able to get what was inside. Yi Futian nodded. All right. I know where one of the swords is. I will go get it. Yaya and the swordmaster of Lihan looked at him. That sword we saw before that was floating in the air, said Yi Futian. I will go get it. You wait here. He turned and left. His decisive manner made the other cultivators look at him in surprise. Why did he feel like he was free to do as he pleased? I will go with you, said Yaya. All right, said Yi Futian with a nod. The two of them left together. The cultivators of the Yuanyang clan and the Heavenly Sword Hall left as well, going to find the other two swords. How do you know that that sword is the right one? Yaya asked him telepathically. I sensed it, answered Yi Futian with a smile. Why are you doing this? Yaya did not understand. Everything that Yi Futian was doing was too honest. He did not need to do this. I know where the other two swords are as well, said Yi Futian. With his divine eyes, he could see through all illusions. Once he had seen that sword in the matrix, he had known that the whole city was actually within a sword matrix. Yaya looked at him in shock. If that was true, then she understood even less than she had thought. Wouldn't it be easier to wait until their opponents have been defeated, and then come take the swords? Yaya, it is likely that I will become a Renhuang here in the God's Relic, said Yi Futian. The color drained from Yaya's face as she looked back at Yi Futian. Renhuang, the once legendary plane. Would Yi Futian really reach that level? Since Yi Futian had said that, he must be able to feel how swiftly it was approaching. It was not far now. Over the years, the farther and higher I've gone, the harder it has gotten to avoid entanglements with other powerful forces. That is the drawback of strength. The stronger you get, the stronger the people you meet. And similarly, the more talented you are, the more people will pay attention to you, Yi Futian told her. Once I become a Renhuang, I will no longer be a junior. I will be regarded as powerful by all of the 3,000 realms of the Great Path. At that time, I will definitely come into contact with the other great forces. Yaya nodded. Naturally, she understood this. Once Yi Futian became a Renhuang, things would be different. With his talent and strength, he would truly attract the attention of the people of the 9 supreme realms. When a man of unparalleled talent walks alone through the world, he could possibly make the whole world his enemy. I faced this situation before in the barren state. I hope that on my way to dominate the 3,000 realms of the Great Path, I will make many more friends. Here in the God's Relic, we have many juniors, all of them heirs of many different forces. They will be in charge of their respective forces in the future. They will influence the situation in the 9 supreme realms, said Yi Futian. He did not continue explaining. There were still some things he wanted to do, but doing them by himself, even as a Renhuang, would be nearly impossible. He was probably the most skilled person here in the God's Relic. If he had to fight, he could fight them all. But if he did that, then when he left, he would have made an enemy of all 9 supreme realms. Yaya stared at his handsome profile. Her mood seemed to change. Would Yi Futian be able to dominate the whole world when he became a Renhuang? One can inherit the will of the swordsman who once ruled this place here. It is a wonderful opportunity, but it is also dangerous. In fact, I don't want to put you in danger. As long as you are safe, all will be well. But you and the Swordmaster of Lihen both have a chance to inherit the will. Do you want it, or should it go the Swordmaster of Lihen? Yi Futian suddenly asked, changing the subject. Now they were talking about who would inherit the will. If the other forces knew of this, who knew how they would feel? From what he said, it was clear that despite the goodwill that Yi Futian had expressed, he was not going to just give up on the things that he should fight for. There were some things that could only be given to the people that he trusted the most. Give it to the Swordmaster of Lihen. Even if it's dangerous, he won't want to miss this opportunity, said Yaya. She had known the Swordmaster of Lihen for many years. Very well, said Yi Futian with a nod. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yuan Hong and the other Yuanyang clan cultivators, as well as the cultivators from Heavenly Sword Hall and Qishao Divine Mountain, were waiting in front of the central Divine Sword Matrix. Yuan Hong and the other Yuanyang clan cultivators, as well as the cultivators from Heavenly Sword Hall and Qishao Divine Mountain, were waiting in front of the central Divine Sword Matrix. After a short while, Yi Futian and Yaya returned carrying a sword in their hands. You managed to get one? Yuan Hong exclaimed as he looked at Yi Futian. Yi Futian nodded his head and said, Give it a try. As he said this, he waved his palm. The sword immediately flew out with a whistling sound and landed directly in one of the 9 major points of the divine matrix. Countless sword rune lines lit up in an instant. They were even more dazzling when they were lit up. Clearly, there were no issues with this sword. Many people glanced at Futian. He actually managed to find something. Yuan Hong was somewhat curious, so he asked, "What makes you so sure?" "This sword stood out too much," Futian answered with a smile. Yuan Hong was somewhat doubtful. Was it truly so simple? Was it really that easy to retrieve the swords? If it was so easy to do so, then why had all the people who had previously entered God's relic only managed to obtain 6 swords? Our members and the members of Heavenly Sword Hall have also discovered a sword. They are attempting to retrieve it as we speak, Yuan Hong said. Futian nodded in agreement. However, they took a long time to retrieve this sword. When they returned, quite a few people were missing, and there was even a person who was injured. It was one of the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall that was a step away from becoming a Renhuang. He and another top figure of the Yuanyang clan had joined forces to retrieve this sword. A cultivator from Heavenly Sword Hall walked up and inserted the sword into the matrix. Instantly, countless streams of sword chi burst forth from the vast divine matrix and covered the entire sword city. Only the last major point was left. Many swords were already clanking in harmony. They seemed to have formed some sort of resonance. Only one sword is missing. The rest of them looked at the divine sword matrix. They only had to obtain one more sword, and they could unlock the divine sword matrix. It would be a great fateful encounter. However, sword wool was everywhere in this sword city. There were many swords dispersed throughout the city. Which sword was it? Have you discovered anything? Yuan Hong asked. The rest of them all shook their heads. Should we gather all the swords in the city and test each sword one by one? Yuan Hong continued saying. Futian was speechless. As expected of a top figure from the Central Emperor Realm's Yuanyang clan, it was difficult for ordinary people to compare with such spirit. How much effort would they have to expend in order to retrieve all of the swords in this place? Many people would most likely have to lose their lives for them to achieve such a feat. If we get it wrong, we might end up destroying the foundations of the sword matrix. The cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall exclaimed. Yuan Hong scowled and said, "That means that our only choice is to find the last sword. Do you have any ideas on how to do so?" The members from Heavenly Sword Hall all shook their heads. They did not have any leads at the moment. "I know where the sword is," Futian said. Immediately, everyone's gazes fell on him. "Where is it?" Yuan Hong asked. Futian walked towards a spot not far to the side of the divine sword matrix. There was a broken sword there. He picked up the broken sword. He could clearly sense that the broken sword also contained a powerful sword will. He carried the broken sword and walked towards the sword matrix. Yuan Hong and the rest revealed strange looks on their faces. The sword was right beside the sword matrix. Was it also a broken sword? Many people were somewhat doubtful. "Hold on!" The cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall cried out as they saw Futian walking towards the sword matrix. Futian looked towards them. "How can you be certain that it is this broken sword?" The leader of the members of Heavenly Sword Hall was renowned in the Myriad Realm. He had cultivated for many years and was still a sword saint, but his ability was unfathomable. He was known as Sword Saint of Avicii. "The sword matrix led me to it," Futian said as he looked towards the divine sword matrix in front of him. "Are you certain?" Sword Saint of Avicii opened his eyes and stared at Futian. There was a divine light in his eyes, and his gaze was extremely frightening. "It won't be a problem," Futian replied. "If you are wrong and the sword matrix is destroyed, you will pay the price," Sword Saint of Avicii said. After that he did not say any more. Yu Sheng frowned when he heard these words. This person's tone was very arrogant. Who did he take Futian to be? Was Futian their errand boy? If Futian made a mistake, he would need to pay the price? Futian smiled and kept walking. He inserted the broken sword into the final point of the matrix. Sword will lingered, and everyone's gazes stared at the divine matrix. The next moment, the 9 swords lit up with a frightening glow. The broken sword seemed to have been restored to its original unbroken state. Divine light flickered as though divine swords were inserted in the 9 points of the matrix. At this moment, the divine sword matrix began to flow. The central pattern of the sword matrix also began to rotate. From all around, countless sword chi streaked towards the divine matrix. The sword matrix's light screen was opened, and they could now walk into it. We did it. Many people were astonished. That broken sword was actually one of the swords they needed. How did this fellow know that it was the one? Could it be that the sword matrix had actually led him to it? Futian ignored what the others thought about him. His gaze was aimed at the divine sword matrix. His eyes were extremely bright and could see through everything. Within his field of vision, the sword will in the entire city was flowing towards that divine sword. The sword will then descended into the center of the pattern. Such a sword will was something that he could not stand against. As expected, it is not something that is easily inherited, Futian thought. The members of the few top forces were about to make a move, especially the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall. They were the purest swordsmanship force among the top forces. However, they had also sensed the might of this sword will. Wanting to inherit this sword will was most likely not going to be easy. It could even pose a danger to their lives. The sword matrix has opened. Please send a representative to give it a try. My side will go last. Whoever manages to get the sword can lay claim to it. How about it? Futian suggested as he faced the crowd. Yuan Hong looked at Futian and nodded his head slightly, saying, I agree. Let the various forces take turns. Futian had the greatest contribution in activating this matrix. He was already being gracious by letting them go first. The cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall did not say anything and remained staring at the matrix. With the strength of Futian's party, what else could he do but let them go first? Even if Futian allowed them to go first, could it be that he believed that he could still obtain the sword in the end? No matter what happened, it would never reach his group's turn. Since young Master Yi is here, we will not participate, Qin he said with a faint smile. Other people might not know much about Futian, but she did. Moreover, there was some level of friendship between Futian and her. Since they would not be in the running, they might as well declare it. Thank you, goddess. Futian smiled as he nodded his head. Some people looked at Qin He's group. This woman had a stunning appearance, but she acted so subdued before Futian. Could it be because of Futian's looks? Futian was indeed a fine specimen of handsome looks. However, if it was so, wasn't she too shallow? For cultivators, especially male cultivators, they did not value appearances at all. One's ability would always come first. Everyone please go ahead, Futian said with a smile. How could inheriting this sword possibly be that easy? It was not just him who knew this. The other forces also knew this. Their expressions turned slightly serious. Heavenly Sword Hall is a swordsmanship force. You may go first, Yuan Hong from Yuanyang clan said to the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall, inviting them to go first. Sword Saint of Avicii's gaze turned towards the center of the sword matrix. He was not very confident. Who will go? He asked the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall. They were all somewhat hesitant. If they succeeded, it was possible that they could inherit the divine sword. However, if they failed, it was possible that they would die. The first person to go would have a great but dangerous opportunity. I will go. An elder from Heavenly Sword Hall walked out. He walked towards the center of the divine matrix. In an instant, a frightening sword will flowed in. Step by step, he walked to the center of the pattern on the divine matrix. Instantly, endless sword will descended. He reached out his hand to grab hold of the divine sword. Buzz. In Sword City, endless sword will surged into the divine sword. Sword will descended, penetrating the elder's body. His facial expression changed drastically. Within his body, a powerful sword will burst forth. Even his sword spirit had appeared. His sword will seem to form physical swords that collided with his sword spirit. The elder let out a scream. Continuous streams of sword will descended, and his body then gradually dissipated into nothingness. Those who witnessed this scene felt their hearts shiver. The elder had failed. As expected, he paid the price for failing with his life. The face of Sword Saint of Avicii turned sullen. He looked towards the cultivators from the other forces and said, It's your turn. The cultivators of Yuanyang clan, as well as Qishao Divine Mountain, stared at the divine matrix. They had all fallen silent. Under such circumstances, they were also not confident that they could obtain the sword. We have decided to continue observing for now, the cultivators of Qishao Divine Mountain declared. Does anyone want to give it a try? Yuan Heng looked towards the cultivators of the Yuanyang clan and declared, whoever obtains it can claim it as their own. With the previous example, no one dared to act. They were all not confident that they could succeed. This divine sword was not so easy to obtain. Looking at this scene, Yuan Heng turned towards Yi Futian and said, "It seems that you all should still go first." "All right." Yi Futian nodded. He walked forwards into the center of the sword matrix. When the others saw this, they revealed strange looks. Was he personally attempting to retrieve the sword? When Yi Futian walked into the divine matrix, he felt the endless sword will descending upon him. Deed of thorough comprehension activated, and became a divine furnace. 9 words circled him, and heaven and earth resonated. At the same time, inside his body, there were countless branches and leaves enveloping his core. When the sword will flowed into him, it was consumed within his body. "Huh." The crowd was staring at Yi Futian. His response seemed mild. Yi Futian raised his head and looked at the divine sword above him. His eyes were frightening. In this instant, he seemed to have entered the world of the sword. Within this world of the sword, there was an illusory figure that was practicing sword techniques. This is a sword spirit, Yi Futian thought. After a short while, a dull thud came from within the divine sword matrix. Yi Futian stepped out from within it. He walked out unscathed. However, he did not manage to inherit the divine sword. The Yuanyang clan and cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall all glanced bizarrely at Yi Futian. Did he manage to walk out alive? However, he must have been through a great deal. How was it? Yaya looked at Yi Futian. "I'm all right," Yi Futian said in a low voice. His heart wavered slightly as he looked at Swordmaster of Lihan and transmitted his thoughts, saying, "Swordmaster of Lihan, are you willing to inherit this sword?" Swordmaster of Lihan revealed a strange look as he looked at Yi Futian. "Just now I have already investigated it. There is a sword spirit hidden within this sword. It should have been left behind by the previous owner of the divine sword," Yi Futian explained. "If Swordmaster of Lihan wishes to inherit this sword, when you step up to the sword, you must first sense the existence of the sword spirit. Do not hesitate and directly inject your spiritual soul into the sword and merge it with the sword spirit. However, I am not certain what will happen after this. It is very likely that you will pay with your life if you fail. According to my estimation, the chances of you succeeding is only 50%. Swordmaster of Lihan was silent. He looked at Yi Futian and asked, "If it was you?" 100%. Yi Futian did not hide anything and continued saying, "It is of little value to me. Hence, Swordmaster of Lihan should decide for himself." Swordmaster of Lihan had been cultivating for many years. Although his combat ability was not considered to be exceptionally powerful, his state of mind had experienced years of tempering and was extremely stable. He had also been constantly pursuing even higher levels of achievement. Hence, even though there was some risk, Yi Futian still let Swordmaster of Lihan decide for himself. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. After Swordmaster of Lihan heard Yi Futian's transmitted thoughts, he fell silent. Back then, when he was cultivating in the Emperor Xia's realm, he had always wanted to venture out after he reached the Nirvana plane. After Swordmaster of Lihan heard Yi Futian's transmitted thoughts, he fell silent. Back then, when he was cultivating in the Emperor Xia's realm, he had always wanted to venture out after he reached the Nirvana plane. He had been in Lihan heaven for many years, and had accomplished all that he had wanted to. For him, there was only the pursuit of great achievements in swordsmanship. Hence, he could only aim to step into the legendary Renhuang plane. However, for him, this step had been as difficult as reaching the heavens. Hence, he had ventured out from Emperor Xia's realm. It took him many years of trials and tribulations before he managed to traverse the boundaries and arrive in the Central Emperor realm. These past years, he had always been on the road, and had endured many hardships. He had also reached the limits of his plane, but he was still far from reaching the Renhuang plane. He understood that his talents were limited. Even though his state of mind was transcendent, he still could not break through to the next realm. This was a threshold for him. Now, Yi Futian was confident that he had a 100% chance of inheriting the divine sword. Yet Yi Futian had given him the opportunity. He knew that Yi Futian was not lacking in fateful encounters. His talents were too dazzling to behold. The youth who had ascended the 33rd layer of heaven and had battled Wang Chuan back then could no longer be mentioned within the same breath as the youth before him now. On the other hand, the sword master of Lihan was missing such a fateful encounter. Yi Futian claimed that the sword master of Lihan only had a 50% chance of success. If he failed, it was very likely that he would end up like the previous cultivator and pay with his life. Even if it was merely a 20% chance, it would still be worth a try, let alone 50%. The sword master of Lihan exclaimed through his transmitted thoughts. If the sword master of Lihan had relied on himself, it would have been impossible for him to come across such a fateful encounter. Before this, in order to enter God's relic, he had wanted to seek help from Heavenly Sword Hall to bring him along with them. It was only due to Yi Futian's arrival, and that Yi Futian had brought him along with him, that he had the chance of entering God's relic. Here in the Central Emperor realm, the sword master of Lihan's previous status before coming here was not worth mentioning at all. Therefore, he would certainly give inheriting the divine sword a try. All right, Yi Futian responded. He turned his gaze towards the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall and said, "Are you going to try again next?" Yi Futian had attempted it just now. Even if the sword saint of Avicii tried his hand at it, he would most likely not be able to decipher the secret of the divine sword in one go. This was enough for the sword master of Lihan to have this opportunity. Yes, the sword saint of Avicii merely responded with one word. This time, he personally came forward and walked towards the pattern of the sword matrix beneath the divine sword. If Yi Futian could walk out alive and unscathed, what did the sword saint of Avicii have to fear? He wanted to see how profound this divine sword was exactly. The sword saint of Avicii walked into the sword matrix and felt an extremely powerful pressure. Sword will poured down on him. Brilliant golden divine light lit up around his body. His pupils looked towards the divine sword. Innumerable beams of golden light enveloped it. He wanted to directly seize it. His will swept out and was extremely domineering. Buzz! The divine matrix activated. An endless sword will flowed in from the entire city. Sword will kept descending upon him. A frightening scene exploded on the divine sword matrix. The sword saint of Avicii let out a low groan. His face suddenly turned pale. However, his will still did not give up on observing and invading the divine sword. He seemed to vaguely sense something. This divine sword seemed to have a spirit within it. The sword spirit seemed to have become a sword. It came towards his spiritual soul along with countless sword will. His expression suddenly changed. With a loud rumble, golden divine light flashed. He let out a dull moan, and his body immediately vanished and appeared below. The sword will tore large holes in the clothes on his body. A streak of blood flowed out from the corners of his mouth. Is he injured? The cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall looked at the sword saint of Avicii. Was he also injured? However, the sword saint of Avicii directly turned to look at the divine sword. He had already caught a glimpse of the mystery behind it. With a few more chances, he was confident that he could decipher its secret and seize control of it. Yi Futian glanced at the sword saint of Avicii. This person was more powerful than he imagined. I will try again. The sword saint of Avicii walked forward, wanting to continue trying. Sir, Yi Futian yelled out. The sword saint of Avicii turned and looked at him. Since we have agreed on the rules, let's all follow them. That way we can all be amicable. They should be the ones to go next. Yi Futian turned to look at the cultivators of Yuanyang clan and Qishao Divine Mountain. The sword saint of Avicii glanced at Yi Futian. He had an intense penetrating gaze. At a glance, it was as though a sword was shooting over at Yi Futian's eyes from a distance. When Yi Futian sensed that sword will, he raised an eyebrow. However, The Sword Saint of Avicii did nothing after that, and still backed down. Since he could not manage to do it in one try, the others should also not be able to do so. This time, Yuanyang clan and Qishao Divine Mountain did not just observe. They also personally participated. However, their attempts still ended up in failure. Yi Futian looked at the Swordmaster of Lihan and saw him taking a step forward. Swordmaster of Lihan. Yi Futian took out another fruit of the way and handed it to Swordmaster of Lihan, saying, "Swallow this." Swordmaster of Lihan looked Yi Futian in the eyes and then nodded his head. He received the fruit of the way and swallowed it. The next moment his life aura swelled up majestically. His spiritual energy was powerful, and his condition was pushed to its extreme. The crowd gave the two of them strange looks. With such a sense of ceremony, why did it seem as though this person was certain to succeed? The Swordmaster of Lihan took a step forward and entered the matrix. He faced the same sword will that the others had experienced. His life aura exploded out furiously. The sword will around him flowed. His eyes stared right at the divine sword in the air above his head. His spiritual soul directly invaded it. Unparalleled sword will descended as though wanting to eradicate him. As he withstood the extremely intense pain, there was an incredible staunch look in the Swordmaster of Lihan's eyes. Rumble. Similar to the previous cultivators, he too sensed the world of the sword and the existence of the sword spirit. The sword spirit immediately descended upon him, along with endless sword will. Before this, the Sword Saint of Avicii had also reached this point. However, he had evaded the sword will. The Swordmaster of Lihan did not evade it. His spiritual soul pressed forward, allowing the sword will to penetrate it as it continued to charge towards the sword spirit. In this instant, he only sensed that his entire spiritual soul was on the brink of being destroyed. It also seemed as though he was no longer a person, but instead had become a sword, and was undergoing tremendous pain. The will of the fruit of the way furiously exploded at this moment. It protected his life aura, and made it even stronger. The crowd faintly saw a sword in the body of the Swordmaster of Lihan. It was his sword spirit. Right now, the Swordmaster of Lihan was going through an intense struggle of choice. If I die here today, may my sword spirit return to Lihan heaven, the Swordmaster of Lihan thought. The next moment, a ferocious aura burst out from inside his body and merged into the ethereal divine sword. At the same time, the accompanying endless sword will descended. Cracks appeared on his sword spirit. Has he gone insane? Many people were looking at the Swordmaster of Lihan. However, up until now, he was actually still alive and had not been eliminated by the sword will. Before this, didn't this person want to join their heavenly sword hall? After being rejected, he had been taken away by Yi Futian. Now, he actually wanted to inherit the divine sword. There can be no construction without destruction, Yi Futian mumbled. He had still somewhat underestimated the might of the divine sword. Letting the Swordmaster of Lihan inherit, it was indeed extremely risky. However, this was Swordmaster of Lihan's decision. If something truly went wrong, Yi Futian would definitely take action to try to save his life. However, right now the arrow had already been drawn. They could only continue pushing forward. Ding! With a sharp whistling sound, the Swordmaster of Lihan's sword spirit cracked, and the divine sword descended, appearing inches above his head. Swordmaster of Lihan's entire person seemed to have fallen into a state of absolute deadly silence. In the sky above the entire vast and endless sword city, countless sword will came down and landed on the divine sword. They then penetrated his body, as though they were baptizing his figure. Yi Futian's senses were extremely sharp. He could clearly sense the pain that Swordmaster of Lihan was experiencing now. Swordmaster of Lihan appeared to be deadly silent, but in reality, he was withstanding unparalleled pain. Tens of thousands of swords were passing through his body. The only thought in his mind was to keep on bracing it. He was facing the baptism of all the sword will in the entire sword city. Is this considered a success? Yi Futian clenched his fist slightly as he witnessed the majestic scene in the divine matrix. If the Swordmaster of Lihan succeeded, it would be a metamorphosis for him. Like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, the Swordmaster of Lihan would complete this baptism. For Yi Futian, this would not be of much benefit. However, it was different for the sword master of Lihan. It would be a truly transcendent metamorphosis for him. Thump. Sword Saint of Avicii took a step forward. There was a golden divine light in his eyes. His eyes pierced through the empty space and stared straight ahead. A golden divine sword appeared with a flash. This person was actually showing signs of succeeding. Construction after destruction. This person, who had previously wanted Heavenly Sword Hall to bring him along into God's relic, was actually about to inherit this divine sword? Was Yi Futian's prior attempt just to pave the way for this person? He also noticed this. Her beautiful eyes glanced at Yi Futian. Did he give this fateful encounter to the sword master of Lihan? Sir, what are you doing? Yi Futian stepped forward and stood before Sword Saint of Avicii, saying, "We have laid down the rules before this in order to be amicable and to see who was destined to inherit this divine sword. It has always been that those with ability would seize the fateful encounters of God's relic. What rules are there to speak of?" The Sword Saint of Avicii said indifferently. After he said this, countless golden divine swords appeared around him. Each divine sword was branded with golden space runes. They were very eye-catching and seemed to be able to traverse space to eliminate his opponent directly. It was not just around Sword Saint of Avicii. Many golden divine swords even appeared around the matrix. They pointed straight at the sword master of Lihan in the matrix. At this moment, the sword master of Lihan most likely could not block them. "Yu Sheng," Yi Futian shouted. Yu Sheng immediately understood and stepped out with large steps. Buzz! The golden divine swords pierced the empty space and attempted to kill the sword master of Lihan. However, a demonic silhouette descended from the sky. A demonic wall appeared around the sword master of Lihan, blocking off the space around him. When they saw this, the cultivators from Heavenly Sword Hall stepped forward one after the other, their bodies leaping into the air. In an instant, sword will covered the sky, enveloping boundless space. Countless divine swords howled and let out sharp screeching sounds. The majestic sword will contained extremely intense killing aura. They looked at Yi Futian and Yu Sheng. A cold look of indifference flashed past in their eyes. Since they had found out the method to inheriting the divine sword, how could they just let the sword master of Lihan, a person who had even requested their help to enter God's relic, do so? Yi Futian and Yu Sheng wanting to hold them off appeared to be a futile attempt. Those with ability can seize them? Yi Futian looked at Sword Saint of Avicii. Of the 3 remaining swords, I alone obtained 2 of them. After opening the divine sword matrix, I never thought of claiming the divine sword for my own, and instead let everyone contend for it fairly. Since you claim that those with ability can seize this fateful encounter, then so be it. The members of Heavenly Sword Hall revealed cold smiles when Yi Futian said this. Could it be that he still believed that he could block their swords? Could he even block the sword of just Sword Saint of Avicii alone? At this moment, a dazzling godly spear appeared in Yi Futian's hand. Fighting will filled the air. Alone, he was prepared to take on 10,000. He had an unparalleled aura around him. He pointed the long spear at the leading Heavenly Sword Hall cultivator, saying, "Those who step forward will die. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." The handsome figure stood in midair, like a white-haired god of war. The handsome figure stood in midair, like a white-haired god of war. At this moment, the fighting will of Yi Futian was intense. The cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall frowned. Sword will surged out from their bodies too. Those who stepped forward would die. Yi Futian was attempting to stop the Heavenly Sword Hall alone. Moreover, he had the audacity to utter such a presumptuous statement, having no respect for the Heavenly Sword Hall at all. The cultivators of Yuanyang clan stared at Yi Futian with great interest. They had not expected him to be such a domineering figure. However, could he really stop the Heavenly Sword Hall? Swoosh swoosh. Dazzling sword will erupted and charged towards Yi Futian ferociously. A swordsman beside the Sword Saint of Avicii took a step forward. Countless hurricanes and storms appeared all around them, as a myriad of swords was unleashed from the eyes of the storms, aiming straight for Yi Futian. The swords attempted to tear the space apart. Those who stepped forward would die. He wanted to see for himself how he would die. Buzz! Futian's figure moved. His arm shook, and the spear became a beam of light that directly charged into the storm. With just his body of flesh and blood, he pierced right into the eye of the storm. At this moment, a golden hole seemed to appear in the storm. A godly spear appeared and swept across the sky. Bang! A soft thud sounded. The swordsman that had attacked saw a golden illusion. The next moment, the spear directly pierced through his glabella. Fresh blood seeped out. The scene was horrifying. How is it possible? This final thought emerged in the swordsman's mind. After that, his consciousness dimmed, and his spiritual soul shattered. His body directly plummeted down to the ground. He was killed in one blow. I am not fooling around, Futian said indifferently, as he pointed his spear at the members of the Heavenly Sword Hall before him. A suffocating sword will envelop the space around them. Many sword spirits directly appeared from thin air and floated behind the cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall. Not fooling around. He actually killed someone. Alone, Futian stood in midair in front of the cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall, threatening that anyone who stepped forward would die. This scene was extremely embarrassing for the members of the Heavenly Sword Hall. Not only was it because one of their companions had fallen, but it was also because this was a disgrace for the Heavenly Sword Hall. A person who had wanted to join Heavenly Sword Hall, in order to enter God's relic, had now snatched the teachings of the divine sword from right in front of them. As for them, they were being held back by a man with a spear. As the strongest swordsmanship force in the Myriad Realm, the Heavenly Sword Hall had never encountered such a disgrace. Moreover, this time, their commander was the powerful sword saint of Avicii. The cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall wielded their sword spirits together. They mainly cultivated sword spirits. Their sword spirits were very powerful. Each sword spirit had frightening rune lines imprinted on them. Their way was imprinted on them. A sword spirit guiding a cultivator in their cultivation could increase the chances of them breaking through to the Runhuang plane. Each sword spirit was forged through many hardships. When they reached the Runhuang plane, their sword spirits could directly serve as the foundation for their divine wheel of the Great Path. In an instant, countless sword spirits pointed towards Futian at the same time. It seemed as though the space was about to be ripped to shreds. Each sword spirit contained different ways, but they were all very sharp. Swordwell howled with sharp ear-piercing screams. Who could possibly survive an attack from so many of these swords? This time, they wielded their swords but did not advance. It seemed that the death of the person before had caused them to grow cautious, even though they were dissatisfied. On Futian's body, Runhuang-level fighting will furiously burst forth. He had an imposing aura. Futian stood alone against so many of them. He became a peerless god of war. With a spear in hand, he was invincible. The swords attacked, and the space was torn apart. The sharp howl of swords ringed in the ears of all present. Destructive winds filled the air. Countless sword spirits attacked Futian at the same time, all of the swords flying together. Each of them was an extraordinary weapon. This scene was grand and domineering. Futian took a step forward. His fighting will that was bursting forth swelled to its limit. Great Path aura surged forth. The spear in Futian's hand pierced forwards into the space. Although he had not practiced spear techniques, he had practiced halberd techniques. Their great paths were interconnected, and there were similarities between spears and halberds. The spear was like a dragon that rumbled forward with an unparalleled fighting will. Rumble! A dull sound exploded in the space. Once the spear landed, the entire space before Futian was blown apart. The sword spirits trembled violently. Cracks even appeared on some sword spirits. The sword shook, and some sword spirit immediately shattered while cracks appeared on others. Dull sounds reverberated in the surrounding space. Many people spat out mouthfuls of fresh blood. Their faces turned pale. The sword will of some of these people dissipated, their auras rapidly weakening. In just an instant, the auras of the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall were drastically weakened. One spear. It was still just one spear. Everyone else was astonished. This white-haired youth was actually powerful to such an extent. Who could receive a strike from his spear? With him standing there, no one could take a step forward. Among the Yuanyang clan, Zhu Qi was shocked. The master of the Black Wind Condor was so powerful. His abilities were actually so terrifying. It actually was as that despicable Black Wind Condor had said. Compared to Yi Futian, the monstrous figures that she knew of paled into insignificance. Among Yuanyang Palace, the ruling power of the Yuanyang realm, who could take a hit from this spear? Even among the members of the Heavenly Sword Hall of the 9 Supreme Realms, no one could do so. It was even more so for them, a force from a lower world ruled by the Yuanyang clan. She recalled that this person had a friendly attitude, and that he had actively sought out the swords for the crowd. He had also suggested that they all took turns to try and inherit the divine sword based on destiny and luck. Zhu Qi had believed that he had done so because he was weak. Now as she looked at him again, he was so outstanding. It was as though the person from before and the person now were two completely different people. Let alone Zhu Qi, even the commander of Yuanyang clan. Yuan Hong was extremely astonished inside. That spear strike was definitely stunning. This person's elegance and talent were comparable to the figures at the pinnacle of the 9 realms. Such a person was actually a nobody. Yuan Hong had not known of him before this. Yuan Hong even believed that today's contest for the divine sword was unrelated to this white-haired youth. After all, Yi Futian's group was weak. Such a lineup could not possibly contend for the divine sword. Even if Yuan Hong followed the agreement and did not contend for it, would the other forces also agree to do so? Just as Yuan Hong had predicted, Heavenly Sword Hall did not agree to this and directly attacked. When Heavenly Sword Hall snatched the divine sword away from the Swordmaster of Lihan, Yuan Hong would then snatch the divine sword away from Heavenly Sword Hall. However, Yuan Hong had not imagined that a man and a spear was standing against Heavenly Sword Hall. When one man guarded the pass, 10,000 men would not be able to get through. The spear in Yi Futian's hand emanated a powerful Renhuang-level fighting will. It was most likely an item he acquired from God's relic. With Yi Futian's talent, the person who inherited the divine sword by right should not be the Swordmaster of Lihan. Unless Yi Futian intentionally gave up the opportunity to the Swordmaster of Lihan. Yi Futian's attempt prior to this was not to inherit the divine sword, but to examine it and search for ways to inherit it. Moreover, he had successfully carried out what he had intended to do. Hence, they witnessed the success of the Swordmaster of Lihan, giving up the teachings of the divine sword willingly. What kind of disposition was this? Did he look down on such teachings? As the direct heir of the Yuanyang clan, Yuan Hong was well aware that God's relic was not a site left by modern-age swordsmen. It was an ancient battlefield. The teachings left here were a complete great path. The reason why God's relic caused such a huge commotion in the 9 realms was that many fateful encounters were hidden here. Anyone who was fortunate enough to seize it would leave this place as an extraordinary Renhuang. The maidens of Brahma's pure sky stared at Yi Futian. Their eyes glistened with light. He had grown stronger, far stronger than when they met him at Xiantian Pavilion. Right now, even if he was faced with Yi Tianyu again, the latter would most likely be no match for him. Besides, Qin was Virgin Genie of Brahma's pure sky. In the past, she visited the prophet when she was in the demon realm. She first met Yi Futian there. Suddenly, she recalled an incident. Back then, not long after Yi Futian had entered the prophet's palace, the prophet committed suicide. Since then, there was no prophet in this world. Prior to his death, the prophet had prophesied that there would be a huge occurrence in the heavenly mandate realm. Everyone had their attention drawn to Gu Tianxing and Gu Donglu. So nobody drew a connection between the death of the prophet and Yi Futian, the last person whom the prophet had met before he died. However, as Jeannie recalled this incident now, she was struck by the sudden realization. Her heart was throbbing. Could it be that Yi Futian was the one who would transform the heavenly mandate realm, as predicted by the prophet in his prophecy? If the death of the prophet was related to Yi Futian, what was the hidden story behind the case? Yi Futian and Yu Sheng guarded the pass, ensuring that no one could disrupt the Swordmaster of Lihan from inheriting the teachings of the divine sword. The party from Taixian Mountain was a tad bit jealous of the Swordmaster of Lihan. Yi Futian treated this swordsman really well. The swordsman was most likely a senior, that Futian had a lot of respect for. Hence, Futian offered such an important fateful encounter to him. Endless sword will circulated. All the sword will in the entire sword city continued to gush towards the sword matrix, where the sword master of Lihan was. As weak as he was, his body persevered through this stage. His sword will gradually recovered in his body, strengthening him once again. In front of Futian, the sword saint of Avicii's pair of golden eyes remained fixed on him. As expected, no one from Heavenly Sword Hall could take one step further. In the previous attack, only swords had been sent out. No one had advanced. However, the sword saint of Avicii had not sent out his sword. Dazzling golden light emanated from the body of the sword saint of Avicii. In his figure, a divine sword with countless golden rune lines appeared. It hovered above his head. He formed sword mudra with both of his hands. In an instant, sword shadows covered the sky. With Futian's body as the center, countless divine swords imprinted with golden rune lines appeared, blocking out the sky. Beams of divine swords descended, forming a frightening spatial sword veil. They actually formed an astonishing light shroud that sealed Futian within it. Spatial divine swords. Futian raised his head and glanced around. There were golden divine swords everywhere around him. The divine sword in mid-air above the sword saint of Avicii's head seemed to be a sword spirit that had merged with a Runhuang implement. It emanated a gorgeous Runhuang light. Swords resonated with clanking sounds. Endless spatial divine swords floated in the sky. Go! The sword saint of Avicii uttered this word. Divine swords swept across the space towards Futian. Almost all at the same time, in the sky above, countless spatial divine swords traversed the space and descended instantly, slashing across from afar. Rumble! A savage fighting will erupted from Futian. As he took one step forward, the air around him tightened as though the space was under his choke, slowing down the speed of the swords. Billowing fighting will surged out from Futian's body. He lunged, and the spear went for its target. In an instant, the overwhelming fighting will was transformed into countless spear shadows, colliding with the divine swords. The heavens and earth shook. Destructive power swept up into the sky. However, Futian's body instead became a beam of brilliant divine light that immediately pierced through the space and charged straight ahead. The spear's straight tip landed on the strongest divine sword. A brilliant glow was emitted. The divine sword flew back, and the sword saint of Avicii let out a dull groan. A formless power sent his body flying backward from the shock. He collided into the cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall behind him before finally coming to a stop. Cough. A soft cough was heard. A streak of blood flowed out from the corner of the mouth of the sword saint of Avicii. It was still just one spear. It was invincible. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. With one skill, he countered all other techniques. With one skill, he countered all other techniques. With a long spear, Futian blocked in front of Heavenly Sword Hall. Whoever stepped forward would die. In all the 9 realms, there were very few people that were as imposing as he was now. The sword saint of Avicii raised his head and looked at Futian. The tip of the spear still emanated frightening fighting will. The will of a god of war also lingered on Futian's body, causing his combat ability to be extremely powerful. The sword saint of Avicii was very aware of his own ability. He could not be described as weak. In the myriad realm, he was one of the pinnacle figures below the Runhuang plane. Even among the 9 realms, he could still be ranked among those at the top. However, in his first battle after entering God's Relic, Heavenly Sword Hall, which was led by him, was being held off by a man with a spear. This made him feel somewhat depressed. Although he knew that God's Relic would certainly be full of strong cultivators this time around, and that there would be no lack of heaven-defying monstrous existences. As someone who was peerless below the Runhuang plane in Heavenly Sword Hall, the sword saint of Avicii still believed that he had a fighting chance. He felt that he was qualified to battle against the pinnacle figures of the 9 realms. This crushing defeat even made him doubt his own ability. Futian was also looking at him. He retracted his arm and lowered the long spear in his palm. As Futian stood there, He was like a peerless god of war. No one could advance past him. Prior to this, he had used very gentle means for them to contest for the divine sword. His method did not offend nor cheat people, and prevented the top forces of the 9 realms from forging grudges. However, if such a party insisted on defying their agreement, he could only use his ability to force them to submit. Do you still want to try? Futian said as he looked at the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall. The Sword Saint of Avici glanced behind Futian. The Sword Master of Lihan was inheriting the divine sword. All the sword will in the entire Sword City was surging towards him. From the looks of it, the Sword Saint of Avici would not be able to seize it from him anymore. Let's go, the Sword Saint of Avici immediately ordered. He then turned to leave. This was not the only ruin in God's relic. There were other, greater fateful encounters to be contested. Although they had failed miserably here, their combat ability was not weakened by much. They still had the ability to put up a fight. If the Sword Saint of Avici continued to fight Futian to the death, he could not predict what kind of price he would have to pay in order to kill Futian. The cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall retreated after the Sword Saint of Avici. They also looked at the Sword Master of Lihan with deep looks in their eyes. Among them was the swordsman who had crossed swords with the Sword Master of Lihan back then. They all felt somewhat dissatisfied. They might have felt better if Futian had inherited the divine sword himself. However, for a person who found it hard to even enter God's relic to inherit the divine sword, they naturally found it hard to accept this. They could only say that this person's luck was heaven-defying. This fateful encounter would most likely change his destiny. Although, as of now, they still did not know what benefits the divine sword would bestow onto the Sword Master of Lihan. The accumulation of the sword will in all of Sword City, together with that divine sword, was enough to cause him to undergo a metamorphosis. He had already destroyed his own sword spirit, and was now reconstructing it. Very quickly, the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall left one by one. The members of Qishao Divine Mountain also did not say much, and did not even leave behind any words, before turning to leave decisively. Since someone had already inherited the divine sword, and they also had no confidence in taking down Futian, remaining here was a waste of time. Brahma's pure sky would naturally not contend with Futian over the divine sword. However, Qin he did not leave and instead remained there. Although currently Qin he had improved greatly, and was already halfway to reaching the Runhuang Plain, she still knew her own limitations well. Her abilities would be top tier in the Heavenly Mandate realm, but in the 9 realms, she held no advantage. She could not contend against Futian. Right now, there was an opportunity before her to travel together with Futian. Currently, only Yuanyang clan still had the ability to contest for the divine sword. Futian turned his gaze towards Yuanhong. However, Yuanhong smiled and said, "Congratulations. Since the relic has been obtained by you, we will be taking our leave." "Many thanks," Futian replied while nodding in appreciation. Among the few forces, the Yuanyang clan from the Central Emperor realm posed the largest threat to them. For Yuanhong, to voluntarily give up this divine sword was naturally the best outcome. Futian did not have to worry about offending them as well. "I'm Yuanhong from Yuanyang clan. May we meet again," Yuanhong said while saluting Futian with his fists. "I am Futian, a disciple of Sky River Temple of the Tianhe realm. May we meet again," Futian replied. Sky River Temple was the name of the organization name of Sky River Great Elder when he was teaching swordsmanship in the past. It also referred to the mountains where the elder resided. Futian came to the Central Emperor realm as a disciple of Sky River Great Elder. Naturally, it was most suitable for him to declare himself as a disciple of Sky River Temple. Moreover, his master was Qi Xiangang, who was indeed a disciple of Sky River Temple. The Tianhe realm. Yuanhong had heard of it before. In the past, a huge conflict erupted between Shen clan and the Tianhe realm. It was caused by that. Could it be that Futian was related to it? Yuanhong did not dwell on this thought. With a smile, he led his army and left. Here, no one else was contending with Futian now. Only then did Yi Futian look in the direction where Brahma's pure sky was, saying, Goddess Qin, is your group not planning to take a look at other places as soon as possible? We will travel with young Master Yi. Qin He answered with a smile. Yi Futian was stunned. Qin He's eyes revealed a glint of joy. It was enchanting. Why? Does young Master Yi not welcome us? For Goddess Qin to be willing to travel with my party, it's a hard-to-come-by opportunity, Yi Futian said with a smile while nodding. He did not reject them since it had been his hope to get to know Brahma's pure sky more. With Brahma's pure sky, he still had unfinished business. Thank you, young Master Yi. Qin He bowed slightly. The virgins from Brahma's pure sky stared at the two of them. Back when they first met at Xiantian Pavilion, if Yi Futian had truly ventured there for Virgin Qin He, and they had ended up together, their love story would have been the stuff of legend. The two of them were a match made in heaven. Clearly, all the virgins from Brahma's pure sky regarded Yi Futian as a suitable husband candidate. Even if their greatest beauty, Virgin Qin He, would have to lower her status to marry him, the rest still thought of them as a good match for each other. The virgins were all impressed by Yi Futian. Before this, everyone had considered Gu Donglu and Zhang Yuan as the most outstanding people among this generation of the heavenly mandate realm. Now, the virgins felt like Yi Futian should instead be regarded as the most exceptional one. Yi Futian knew nothing about their thoughts. His gaze shifted to look at the Sword Master of Lihan. At this moment, the space surrounding the Sword Master of Lihan had become a cocoon of swords. Countless sword wool crisscrossed and enveloped his body inside the cocoon. The sword wool in the entire sword city flowed here. From being very weak, his aura recovered and became even stronger and more powerful. It was as though he could faintly resonate with the endless sword wool all around him. The divine sword contained a sword spirit within it. Now, this sword spirit had already fused together with the spiritual soul of the Sword Master of Lihan, and they had become one. His sword spirit had been reforged, being reconstructed after being destroyed. Right now, the Sword Master of Lihan himself saw that he had completely entered a certain state. It was as though he had become a sword. He was the center of this world of the sword. He could sense sword will in the entire sword city. It seemed as though his will was everywhere. Yi Futian quietly waited on him. He did not know how long the Sword Master of Lihan would remain in this condition. After a period of time, there was some strange movement in the sword wool surrounding the Sword Master of Lihan. An intense wave of sword wool appeared around his body. Yi Futian raised his head and looked at the area in the sky above. An extremely miraculous sensation swelled up inside of him. It seemed like the Sword Master of Lihan could already control the sword wool in the surrounding space. It felt like there was a willpower that permeated all around them. That was the will of the Sword Master of Lihan. Right at this moment, the Sword Master of Lihan opened his eyes. He looked at Yi Futian and called out, Futian. Sword Master of Lihan, how do you feel? Yi Futian looked at the Sword Master of Lihan. The gaze of the Sword Master of Lihan was sharper than before. His temperament also seemed to have changed. It was as though he had gained a true body for swordsmanship and had become a sword himself. I feel that I can take that final step to reach the Renhuang plane. I also feel completely different from before. This sensation is hard to describe, the Sword Master of Lihan said. Yi Futian revealed a smile. From the looks of it, the Sword Master of Lihan had already completed his metamorphosis. Have you had a breakthrough in terms of plane? Yi Futian asked. It seems as though everything is within my grasp, the Sword Master of Lihan replied. You should be in between the Saint Plane and the Renhuang Plane. Once you pass this point, you will be a Renhuang, Yi Futian explained. The Sword Master of Lihan nodded his head slightly. I no longer need to be guarded, but I still need to cultivate for some time. I do not know how long I will need. God's relic has many more fateful encounters in store. You do not need to stay here and guard me. Go ahead and seek out fateful encounters of your own. Yi Futian had already done more than enough for him. Yi Futian had given him a fruit of the way, and had given such an important opportunity to him that made him go through a metamorphosis. This debt of gratitude was difficult to express in words. He could only remember it in his heart. All right. Yi Futian also did not refuse. As the sword master of Lihan had said, they indeed could not afford to delay any longer. Before this, he was concerned for the safety of the sword master of Lihan. However, now that the sword master of Lihan had already gained control of all the sword will in Sword City, even if Heavenly Sword Hall returned here, they would no longer be able to do anything to him within this Sword City. Sword master of Lihan, I will go on ahead first. After you have finished cultivating, head east. I will be heading in that direction, Futian said. All right. When I am done cultivating, I will come find you, the sword master of Lihan replied as he nodded. I will be off. Futian did not say any more. After he uttered these words, he turned and left the place. The others glanced at the sword master of Lihan. Some were calm, and others were in awe of him. They followed Futian and left the place together, hoping that they would also come across other opportunities. Yaya, would you think badly of me? Futian asked Yaya, who was beside him, as his group traveled at high speeds across the sky. After seeing the metamorphosis of the sword master of Lihan, he did not know whether Yaya would have any thoughts regarding this. Will you mistreat me? Yaya asked as she turned her gaze and looked into Futian's eyes. Futian was stunned. He replied with a smile, I won't. Yaya shifted her gaze and did not say any more, as though Futian himself already knew the answer. This made Futian speechless. He felt pressure as heavy as a mountain weighing down on him. Head east, Futian instructed. The purple god rats that had scouted out the various directions discovered that many top forces were traveling in this direction. This place was previously the lands of a realm. Many ruins had been searched by people before. Futian might be able to obtain the things that they had left behind and had not taken away. But for him, these things would not give him any substantial benefit. He went to 2 different places and had guarded the sword master of Lihan for some time. He could not continue to delay any longer. Hence, he was prepared to fly past all the ruins that they passed by along the way and head forward at full speed to the end. Dou Zhao would most likely not have lied to him. His group traveled extremely fast. They were like shooting stars that swept across the sky in God's relic. However, they were not the only ones to do so. Right now, from all corners of God's relic, people were rushing over at full speed. Some of the fastest ones were the top forces of the Central Emperor realm. They had more intel, and they had a clearer goal than those from other realms. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. While heading east, Futian ordered the members of the Purple Gold Rat clan to head in the 3 other cardinal directions as well. While heading east, Futian ordered the members of the Purple Gold Rat clan to head in the 3 other cardinal directions as well. Dou Zhao claimed that after entering God's relic, they would encounter a great relic if they headed in one direction. Did that mean that there would be different relics in different directions? Why was that so? The purple gold rats made haste as they headed north, south, east, and west. The range that Futian could sense was also constantly expanding. However, after traveling for a period of time, Futian, who was heading east, suddenly stopped. His eyes revealed a strange look. What's wrong? Yaya, who was beside him, asked as she looked at him. Yusheng also looked incredulously at Futian, who had suddenly slowed down. Futian's brow revealed a look of contemplation. He looked towards Luoyue and asked, You heard Lord Taishian mention about God's relic on Taishian Mountain. Have you ever heard about what sort of places these great relics are in? Luoyue shook her head. Taishian Mountain's knowledge of this place is also limited. Futian understood. Taishian Mountain's ability was average. It was likely that they did not know much. In comparison, a force like Divine Palace might know more about these great relics. Is something wrong? Luoyue asked. Futian nodded. When we entered God's relic, due to the fact that the spatial doors were all in different places, we all ended up in different regions. However, we still could sense each other's auras from far away. That meant that the distance between us was not too far, and that we were all still in the same region. Under such circumstances, if all of us headed out in different directions, shouldn't we have ended up heading further away from each other? Of course, Luoyue replied as she nodded her head. If it was so from the start, then why is it that we ended up closer to each other? Futian asked. He noticed a strange phenomenon. He and the members of the Purple Gold Rat clan were originally heading in different directions. Before this, the distance between them was also indeed growing larger. However, as they continued forward, the Purple Gold Rats, who were traveling in one direction, seemed not to be moving further away from him, but instead were drawing closer. He thought that he had sensed it wrongly. After all, when he controlled the Purple Gold Rat clan, he could faintly sense how far away from him they were. However, he could not determine their exact location. He could only get a rough feel. However, as they continued, he sensed a similar sensation coming from the members who went in the other two cardinal directions. He could not help but be suspicious of the possibility that they were actually coming closer together. There is one possibility, Xiaoqing Yuan said. What possibility is that? Futian asked. Suppose this god's relic is a single plane of existence, a spherical world like a planet. Then, if we appeared in the same region, and then headed in opposite directions, the distance between us would first increase, and then decrease, Xiaoqing Yuan explained. You are right, Futian nodded. Xiaoqing Yuan's deduction was the same as his. Let us continue on our way. Futian did not say any more. He kept this in mind, and continued heading east with haste. The sensations he felt after this also confirmed his hypothesis. The distance between him and the Purple Gold Rats was indeed getting closer. After a long while, an endless wasteland appeared before Futian and the others. The members of the Purple Gold Rat clan that headed in the other three cardinal directions were still heading forward in haste. However, Futian already discovered that the distance between them was already very near. Of course, this was relatively speaking. If they continued to head forward, they would end up gathering at one spot. Based on what Dou Zhao had described, they would encounter a great relic by heading in one direction. Was it possible that the great relic that they encountered at the end of the four cardinal directions was actually the same relic? It was just that nobody knew that it was the same relic. That meant to say that the people who entered God's relic before this had never traversed the entire place? We should be arriving soon, Futian said in a low voice. If Dou Zhao's information was not wrong, each direction had a great relic. That meant that it could only be at the intersection point of the four cardinal directions. In this place, he could already see the remnants of the will of humans. There seemed to have been a huge battle here before. What is that? Yaya looked into the distance across the barren mountain range. In front of them, they could see a huge golden skeleton standing erect in the wastelands. They sped up and headed over to the giant skeleton. It's a dragon corpse, Futian mumbled. This skeleton was tens of thousands of meters long. Its size was gigantic. Lying here up close, it was a striking sight to behold. One could imagine how powerful a divine dragon it was when it was alive. Unfortunately, now it was just a pile of bones. However, even as a pile of bones, it still contained intense will. No one has actually taken this away, Luoyue exclaimed. Take it away. Futian said. Why don't you try to take this away from here? Luoyue was stunned. She took a step forward and touched the dragon bones. She wanted to try and lift one of them up, but she discovered that the dragon bones that stood erect in this wasteland did not budge. She could not lift them at all. A golden divine dragon leaves behind golden bones, Futian explained in a low voice. This one was at the demon emperor level. One single bone is enough to create a runhuang implement. Such a huge golden dragon corpse is practically an absolute treasure. However, the people who can enter God's relic are at lower planes. They cannot lift it, and hence cannot take it away with them. Even those who broke through to the runhuang plane in God's relic could not do so. What a waste! The value of the bones of this golden divine dragon is immeasurable, Luoyue exclaimed softly. The rest of them understood how she felt. There was such a treasure here, but no one could take it away. It was very frustrating. The people who had come to God's relic before this must have also felt this way. There seems to be more up ahead, Futian said. He felt a will that was all around them. Up ahead, there was an extremely frightening area of flames. The group continued to advance along the wasteland's mountain range. Not long after, they saw another pile of huge bones. These bones contained a very powerful will of fire. It caused the area where it was to be marked red. It was as though this was an area of flaming mountains. The temperature was exceptionally high. A fire Kylan. The group trembled inside when they saw the bones of the huge divine beast. This was the skeleton of a huge fire Kylan. It had set this area ablaze. Even from where they stood, they could sense its intense will. If it was a person who cultivated flames, they could even gain insight into their cultivation here. What was this place? Xia Qingyuan was shocked. This mountain range in the wasteland was deadly quiet. However, the corpses of these dead divine beasts astonished everyone. It was difficult to remain calm in this place. What exactly had happened here? Were gods truly buried in the tomb of the gods? Could it be that there was a graveyard waiting for them further ahead? They continued forward. Very quickly, they saw another extremely frightening huge beast. Its pair of wings were outspread and blocked out the sky, casting a shade over the vast space. Even though it had fallen, and was just standing erect there in the wasteland, it was still a king of demons. It stood there, posed as though it was roaring towards the sky. A golden-winged giant pung bird. The corpse of this golden-winged giant pung bird was complete. It was not a skeleton. Its flesh was still intact. It emanated bright and divine golden light, and its color had not faded even after countless years of exposure. Its proud head was that of a king of the sky. However, its spiritual soul was already destroyed, and it no longer had any life aura. If one could control the corpse of this golden-winged giant pung bird, even a Run Huang would not be able to harm it. These frightening demons and divine beasts were all killed by humans? Why were these corpses here? What else lay ahead? Yi Futian's group continued on their way. Many other skeletons of demon emperor-level beasts could be seen as they made their way forward. It was as though this was a cemetery of divine beasts. At long last, Yi Futian spotted a human silhouette. It was also the silhouette of someone that he was familiar with. It was the pinnacle figure of Sky Demon Court Jun. In the demon realm, Jun was equally famous as Dragon God Long Chun. He was comparable to the crown prince of Heavenly Mandate Dynasty, Yi Tianyu of the human cultivators. Right now, he appeared to be sitting and cultivating in front of a beast's corpse. The beast was a three-legged golden raven. It was homologous with Jun's original form, was also a three-legged golden raven. Seemingly sensing something, Jun opened his eyes and looked in the direction of Yi Futian's group. You all have also arrived, Jun noted. What is this place? Yi Futian asked. I do not know. Sky Demon Court has records of a divine beast cemetery in the eastward direction of God's relic. It turned out to be true, Jun said. I was wondering whose handiwork was this to have caused all the demon emperors to submit to them. You mean to say that all these demon emperors had a master when they were still alive? Yi Futian exclaimed. That's right. Jun nodded his head and said, I sense that this region of beasts is a habitat created by a supreme being for nurturing beasts to guard this place. Nurturing demon emperors? Yi Futian looked at Jun. He had to say that this idea was extremely bold. Jun nodded. Quite a number of people have gone ahead. Take a look and you will understand. Yi Futian raised his head and looked ahead. He also sensed the frightening aura coming from that direction. He could faintly see unparalleled divine light shining radiantly from there. What was over there? He did not hesitate, moving forward directly. After they traversed through the barren mountains, they saw dazzling divine light glowing. When they reached an elevated spot on the barren mountains, Yi Futian came across some familiar figures. Many members of the demon clan from the Heavenly Mandate realm had gathered here. Members from other forces, such as Sky Demon Court, dragon gods, and divine elephants were present too. Besides that, Yi Futian also saw many other cultivators from the Heavenly Mandate realm. They were cultivators of the Heavenly Mandate Dynasty, Violet Heavenly Palace, and 10,000 Divine Mountain, including the cultivators of Brahma's Pure Sky, who came together with Yi Futian. It seemed that all the top forces from the Heavenly Mandate realm had assembled here. Other than that, there were also some top forces from the Higher Heavens realm. Of course, some other top forces from the 9 realms were here as well. The top forces of the 9 realms were distributed across the 4 cardinal directions. Top forces from various realms could appear at any of the 4 cardinal directions. However, the top forces from the heavenly mandate realm had actually all appeared in this corner. No one was certain as to whether their gathering was a coincidence, or they had spied on and followed each other here. Futian's arrival attracted the attention of many people. When people from the heavenly mandate realm saw him together with Virgin Qin, he from Brahma's pure sky once again, they revealed strange looks. Were the two of them truly not in a relationship? Many people could not help but stare in the direction of Tianyu. However, Tianyu also had an exquisite beauty standing beside him. She was elegant and cool, as expected of Yi Man from Divine Palace. Both Tianyu and Yi Man gave Futian a glance. Then they saw Qin He too. Is that the virgin from Brahma's pure sky? Yi Man asked Tianyu softly. She could more or less guess Qin He's identity. Tianyu nodded. Yi Man examined Qin He carefully. Was this maiden the person whom Tianyu almost married due to the arrangement of the clan? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Although Yi Man cultivated in the Shangxiao Divine Palace, she was not from Higher Heaven's realm. Instead, not only was she from the Snow Divine Kingdom, a top principality from the Shadow Realm, but she was also the princess of the Snow Divine Kingdom. Although Yi Man cultivated in the Shangxiao Divine Palace, she was not from Higher Heaven's realm. Instead, not only was she from the Snow Divine Kingdom, a top principality from the Shadow Realm, but she was also the princess of the Snow Divine Kingdom. The Shadow Realm and the Solar Realm were 2 opposite realms. Each contained the qi of ultimate yin and ultimate yang. In the Snow Divine Kingdom, it was covered by extremely cold snow year-round, and the cultivators there were also extremely cold in nature, like the unmelted ice of thousands of years. The Snow Divine Kingdom dispatched Yi Man to Shangxiao Divine Palace in the hopes that she would cultivate at other peak forces and learn from them. After Yi Man had cultivated in the Divine Palace for so many years, her temperament had indeed changed a great deal. Her unique characteristics inherited from the Snow Divine Kingdom could no longer be observed in everyday life. However, at this moment, the people around her exuded an extremely chilling sensation, and even their eyes were like ice and snow. One look was enough to turn the others into frost. Futian naturally also felt the gaze from Tianyu and Yi Man. He and Qin He both turned their gazes and looked over there with an indifferent expression. In the past, Tianyu, the crown prince of Heavenly Mandate Dynasty, might have been able to give him certain pressure, but now, this crown prince of the Divine Dynasty could no longer pose any threat to him. His gaze didn't linger on Tianyu for too long before he moved his eyes away and looked toward that extremely dazzling place in front of the crowd. What place is this? Futian saw the magnificent scene in front of him, and his heart trembled. What he saw was a brilliant temple interwoven with an incomparable space light beams. Here, the temple stood upon the mountain in the wilderness, and it completely covered this space. Its immensity was incomprehensible. Even divine will could not perceive its boundaries. Divine items, divine implements. Futian's heart trembled. Countless golden space beams seemed to divide this vast expanse into different areas, like a part of this vast and boundless spatial sacred hall. And these areas, where the space was partitioned, seemed to house a dazzling divine item. Were these the divine implements in the divine hall? If the crowd had just walked past a cemetery of a demonic emperor, or a demonic beast raised by a supreme being, then the scene in front of them might very well be a treasure trove collected in an entire lifetime by a supreme character. He saw many different treasures, such as swords and spears, common divine items that were a must, but there were also some rare artifacts. However, these artifacts seemed to be clearly visible to the naked eye, but no one who was present attempted to enter to fight for them. Could it be that they were unable to enter? He glanced at the periphery around the divine hall again. There were corpses on the ground, clearly indicating that fighting had already broken out, which meant that someone was fighting for the divine items. What was happening here? What's going on here? Yi Futian looked in a direction and asked Xiang Mang, the cultivator from the divine elephants. He and the divine elephants went from way back, and had many exchanges with Xiang Mang himself, when he was at the divine elephants, and saw him as a worthy adversary. There are many artifacts sealed in that spatial sacred hall. Each treasure is separated from the other, and needs to be opened individually to release it. Xiang Mang explained to Yi Futian, you see that in front of each treasure, there was an independent space with a pattern of its own. Only when the pattern has been cracked can it be opened. If so, how come no one is doing anything? Yi Futian asked in doubt. They have, Xiang Mang responded. But this spatial sacred hall is very odd. After the pattern has been cracked, the treasure will fly out of the sky from above. So even when you have broken the seal, the treasure itself wants to escape. Proactively solving the puzzle would only be creating opportunities for other cultivators who lay in wait. Gradually, some choose to wait and see even when they have the opportunity, acting more cautiously. Yi Futian nodded. He finally understood what was going on. Anyone would hope that once they opened the seal, the treasure would be theirs. But if the treasure flew out, and thus taken by others, then there was not much point in it. Who would be such a fool? Hence, the situation in front of them. Just how many treasures are hidden in this spatial sacred hall? And is it difficult to open? Yi Futian asked. It's very difficult to open. Looking at it, there ought to be many treasures, Xiang Mang replied. They should all be at the top grade of Renhuang. Yi Futian nodded, and his heart was disturbed. At this time, some purple gold rats went to another area of the ruins. The speed of these purple gold rats was still very fast, not much slower than when they first arrived here. In one of the areas, a purple gold rat met many sacred trees and precious flowers. It was just like when Yi Futian once crossed the sea of the path, when he went to the land of proving the way, and there were many fruits of the way. Aside from that, there were golden sacred trees towering into the sky, with endless lotus flowers that nurtured the great path, and many other exotic plants. This made Yi Futian felt as if it was a divine garden. Moreover, Yi Futian clearly felt that the purple gold rat was very close to him, and very possibly in the same ruin, only in different positions. If this was really a complete larger relic, including all four major directions, then, is this a treasure trove of an incredible character? These demonic emperors were guarding here. And were those grounds the garden of a supreme existence? Yi Futian felt that this relic was called God's relic, because it might really be the relic left by the legendary ancient gods. Is God the most supreme of the imperial realm? He wondered. He glanced at his surroundings, and saw that all the top forces from the 9 realms had gathered here. Among them, there was even the existence of Renhuang, so no one dared to act rashly. At this time, a group of men came toward Yi Futian. Yi Futian's attention turned to them, and saw that it was the cultivators of the Dou tribe, who had fought with him in the underground palace before. The one heading of the group was Dou Zhao, and it was not just them. All the top forces that had twice competed for the relic had arrived one step ahead of him. Ziwei Palace, Clan of the 7 Slayers, Heavenly Sword Hall, Yuanyang Clan, and Qishao Divine Mountain were all present to add to the grandeur of this occasion. Under such circumstances, no one dared to act rashly. Which force dared to claim to be invincible? Even if they were really invincible, would it be enough to beat out the alliance of the others? Did you just get here now? Dou Zhao asked. He had reminded Yi Futian to head east, but Yi Futian had arrived later than him. I went to another relic, and it took some time, Yi Futian said with a smile. Dou Zhao gave Yi Futian a meaningful look. After he seized the spear and the intent of battle, did this guy go ahead and inherit another relic? Have you recovered from your injury? Yi Futian asked. That fruit of the way was quite good, thank you, Dou Zhao said brightly. As a way of thanking you, I plan to lead the Dou tribe to join hands with you and split the treasures 50-50. What do you think? Get out of here. Yi Futian spat those words out. How could this loser propose an even split? 30-70 then, 30 for us and 70 for you. Dou Zhao didn't seem to mind, and continued with a silly smile on his face. He was thinking that judging from the speed with which Yi Futian took hold of the godly spear, There should be a ton of treasures in this spatial sacred hall for the taking. Yi Futian looked up without looking at him. 2080. Dou Zhao gritted his teeth and said, they definitely could not go any lower. He was the descendant of the Dou tribe, with the blood of the fighting god flowing in his body. How could he be humiliated by bargaining like this? I don't need anyone's help. Yi Futian looked at Dou Zhao with a smile. Wah! Dou Zhao looked at Yi Futian and felt an urge to punch his face. Didn't he say that he wanted to be friends? So callous. He was the descendant of the fighting god, and yet he kept retreating again and again. Forget it. You decide then, Dou Zhao said. Judging by the conflicts that had just occurred, he felt that if there were treasures, he had no hope of getting any of them. He was not afraid of those in Saint Plain, but there were several Renhuang in this area, with many other top characters. It would be hard for him to compete. Yi Futian looked at Dou Zhao stunned. He had guts. Deal. Yi Futian immediately agreed without dissent. Indeed, he had been beaten by Yu Sheng into submission. Dou Zhao looked at him, sighing inside. He had to submit because he was less skilled, a party that was defeated. Many people of power looked this way, especially those who were acquainted with Yi Futian. There were even cultivators of top principalities who came to him for alliance. But his attitude, this also made the likes of Yi Tianyu and Zhang Yuan frown deeply. Even those at the peak of power were willing to help him? Could he really be so powerful? Yi Tianyu had witnessed Yi Futian's strength later, when they were at the Divine Palace. But Zhang Yuan had only heard of what happened at the Divine Palace. Help me take care of a person first, Yi Futian said to Dou Zhao. Dou Zhao looked at Yi Futian as if to say, you are badass. Who? He said, gritting his teeth. Him. Yi Futian pointed in a direction. Over there, Zhang Yuan, the supreme body of the Great Path from Violet Heavenly Palace, who was looking at Yi Futian, was stunned for a moment. Yi Futian was pointing at him. This man is known as the supreme body of the Great Path, one of a kind. Although you have the body of the fighting god, your victory is not guaranteed. Since you have nothing to do, why don't you give it a try? Yi Futian said. Nothing to do. After Yi Futian arrived here, everything in this space seemed to have changed. But how come this felt kind of strange? Fine. Dou Zhao gritted his teeth, then turned and walked in the direction of the Violet Heavenly Palace, where Zhang Yuan was located. Dou Zhao of the Dou tribe from Ziwei realm is here to experience the supreme body of the Great Path. Zhang Yuan's face was gloomy, and his eyes were fixed on Yi Futian. This B***star didn't bother to make a move himself, but let people from the other forces attack him instead. Boom! A violent thunder will of the way exploded and swept across the sky in an instant, blasting violently toward Dou Zhao. Bang! Dou Zhao took a step into the void, and a dull sound came out between heaven and earth. He seemed to have turned into a god of war, with divine light shining about him, that directly opened up the will of the god of war. 3 marks of god of war appeared around his brow chakra, which opened up the 3rd layer. The supreme body of the Great Path ought to be incredibly strong. Yi Futian looked down on everyone, so he would give this supreme body of the Great Path a good beating to vent his anger. But how inconvenient it was for Zhang Yuan. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Zhang Yuan looked at Dou Zhao. Although he was angry, he also felt Dou Zhao's dominance. Zhang Yuan looked at Dou Zhao. Although he was angry, he also felt Dou Zhao's dominance. At this time, a mark of the god of war appeared at Dou Zhao's brow chakra, and there an ethereal shadow of the god of war loomed behind him with a horrific will of might. The flash of divine thunder shone in the sky, and in an instant, this world seemed to be facing the apocalypse as the endless thunder now roamed between heaving and earth, casting a matrix of apocalyptic thundering all around him. As he stepped under the matrix, the sword of doomsday appeared in front of him, swallowing and tearing apart all the thundering divine light. Zhang Yuan, the supreme body of the Great Path from a Violet Heavenly Palace, was facing a great enemy. Buzz! A golden divine light exploded, and Dou Zhao started his attack. His body directly pierced through the void as the golden divine light penetrated the space, traversing through it, and appearing in front of the body in a flash. Kill! Zhang Yuan shouted angrily, roaring like thunder with the thunder god's wrath, as the sword of doomsday was released as if to destroy everything in front of him. However, Dou Zhao slammed his fist of flesh and blood onto the sword without dodging and without retreating. There was a terrifying burst of noise between the two. The wandering destructive divine thunder engulfed Dou Zhao entirely. At the same time, a horrific power of terror sent shock waves through Zhang Yuan's body, like rays of golden divine light that penetrated regardless of the divine sword. Bang! Bang! A horrible sound erupted from the inside of Zhang Yuan's body. He groaned and forced his mouth to close. Then his body flew out backward as his face turned bright red, and finally, a mouthful of blood spewed out, and his breath rapidly weakened. The bones and nerves in his body seemed to be shattered. His eyes fixed on Dou Zhao, who was being engulfed by the destructive light of the thunder. The purple thunder shone and floated above his strapping and overbearing torso, and then gradually dissipated, exposing that powerful and overbearing physique. Dou Zhao's eyes contained golden divine light. He stared at Zhang Yuan in front of him, who had no sign of injury. Clearly, he was disappointed. Supreme body of the great path? Dou Zhao mumbled, looking at Yi Futian and said, "Did he give himself that title? He was not too durable." Poof. When Zhang Yuan heard what he had said, another mouthful of blood spewed out again, his face red with incredible shame. He was the first person among the descendants of the Violet Heavenly Palace, known as the Supreme Body of the Great Path. His name resounded in all of the Heavenly Mandate Realm. He was a magnificent figure in his own right in Heavenly Mandate Realm before, but all this changed after Yi Futian's appearance. Today, he was thusly humiliated. The cultivators from Violet Heavenly Palace stepped out to come behind Zhang Yuan, all of them staring coldly at Dou Zhao. The breath from their bodies was frightening. Perhaps. Yi Futian smiled. "So what kind of body are you?" Dou asked curiously. "Divine body of the heavenly path." Yi Futian replied. Dou Zhao felt that he shouldn't have asked. No one could have been as shameless as this. What kind of concept was the divine body of the heavenly path? Under the heavenly path, what other kind of constitutions could be compared? So shameless. How are they going to deal with this? Dou Zhao asked, looking at the cultivators releasing their breaths toward him. "Do you think this kind of strength is worthy of competing here?" Yi Futian asked. "Not worthy," Dou Zhao responded. He was not even sure of himself in the competition, hence his proposition to join hands with Yi Futian. In comparison, Zhang Yuan and the others were even more unworthy. "Then you can decide what to do with them," Yi Futian said. Dou Zhao then stepped out and rushed into the crowd of the Violet Heavenly Palace, violently swinging and blasting the golden divine fists. No one from the Violet Heavenly Palace could counter even one single punch from him. Watching all those who were being blasted and falling, Yi Futian's expression was one of pure indifference. It wasn't that the Violet Heavenly Palace was weak, but that Dou Zhao had opened up the third layer of fighting God's will. In this realm, there were not many equal opponents. There weren't many even in the entirety of the 9 realms. Dou Zhao's combative prowess was definitely top-notch. How sad. Many who witnessed this scene remarked secretly to themselves. However, most of them were not too sympathetic. The aim of those who came here was to compete with each other. Such inferior strength indeed had no place in the competition. Violet Heavenly Palace, in comparison, was still relatively weak. People from the Heavenly Mandate Realm felt the most complicated. Now, someone who was willing to follow Yi Futian proactively had made a move and crushed the Violet Heavenly Palace without even giving them a chance to fight back. The cultivators from the Violet Heavenly Palace were full of grief and indignation, for they had never suffered such great humiliation. If it were to avenge the grudge of the past, Yi Futian could have struck directly. However, he didn't even bother to move, merely ordering Dou Zhao to do his bidding, and they were still abused to such a degree. Enough! A cold voice was heard, and the speaker was the Crown Prince Yi Tianyu of the Heavenly Mandate Dynasty. This time in the God's Relic, the Heavenly Mandate Dynasty and the Violet Heavenly Palace were considered allies. In addition to the Snow Divine Kingdom, where Yi Man was located, these three principalities had formed a rather considerable force. Dou Zhao was born to the Dou tribe, a top principality in Ziwei realm. Previously, when he hadn't been getting along well with Zhang Yuan, Yi Tianyu didn't intervene on account of not wanting to make more enemies. But now that he saw the cultivators of Violet Heavenly Palace being sorely beaten by one man, he had no choice but to step out and say something. Boom! Another violent blast from the fist, and two figures were knocked out in a flying fashion. Dou Zhao turned his head to look at Yi Tianyu, and found that there was a Run Huang on Yi Tianyu's side, an old man from the Heavenly Mandate dynasty. He had been suppressing his realm until after the entrance of God's relic, and his breakthrough was a way of protecting the Heavenly Mandate realm to improve their chances in God's relic. Dou Zhao turned his attention to Yi Tianyu, saying, "Do you fancy a try?" Yi Tianyu stared at Dou Zhao. If they were to fight, he wasn't so sure if he could overcome Dou Zhao. This man had crushed the cultivators of the Violet Heavenly Palace with great ease. Judging from the combative power he had demonstrated, he must be stronger. Enough, Yi Futian said. Dou Zhao turned his head to look at him, somewhat perplexed. He had wanted him to attack, so why stop now? He walked back to Yi Futian and said in a low voice, "I have given you plenty of prestige. If there were any benefits to be had, you should know what to do." Yi Futian looked a bit shocked. Watching this godlike figure next to him, he felt a little curious. This guy seemed to be multifaceted. He was wild and crazy on the outside, but inside he was a bit cute. If Dou Zhao knew the word that Yi Futian used to describe him, what would he think? At this time, all the cultivators from Violet Heavenly Palace glanced at Yi Futian. Their numbers were considerable, and there were many cultivators from the 8 major branches of the Violet Heavenly Palace among them. Back when they took away Gu Donglu, he went to make trouble, but the other refused to turn him over. How high and mighty were they then? But now, Yi Futian looked at them with some contempt, saying, "People of the Violet Heavenly Palace can get the hell out now. There is nothing concerning you here." Boom! The light of thunder flashed, and the cultivators from the Violet Heavenly Palace were extremely incensed when they heard such humiliating words used on them. But when Yi Futian cast his glance toward them, after seeing the gradually sharpened look in his eyes, no one dared to challenge him. All they could do was to look away, endless humiliation filling their hearts. "Let's go," Zhang Yuan said. His group left with their dead and wounded. After the people of the Violet Heavenly Palace left, the space was quiet again. The strength of Zhang Yuan's group was not spectacular, to begin with, so they had a minimal effect on the situation at hand. No one moved, and neither did Yi Futian as he stood there quietly. Although he believed he could unlock the seals of the treasure within the temple, he was unwilling to be the first to make a move, and presumably, everyone else thought the same as well. No one wanted to be so careless in their actions. At this moment, someone walked forward. It was not just one person, but many cultivators from one single top principality now walked toward the spatial sacred hall. At the same time, many more stayed outside on guard, and one of them said, "Since none of you are acting from now on, any looters who dare to touch the items released by us will be killed at all costs." These words contained incredible murderous intent. Many looked at the man speaking, and knew that these people were from the Central Emperor realm. "Where are they from?" Yi Futian asked Dou Zhao. Judging from these arrogant words, they must have possessed great self-confidence in their own strength. If anyone were to rob them of their treasure, they would not hesitate to kill others as a way to deter any looting. The Martial God clan from the Central Emperor realm, one of the top ancient clans. Dou Zhao responded to Yi Futian via voice transmission. The Central Emperor realm was the center of the 3,000 realms of the Great Path, and the top forces among them were mostly clans. Very ancient clans as a matter of fact. Many of them claimed to have descended from the gods, and said that divine blood flowed inside their veins. The surname of the Martial God clan was Martial, indicating the combative power of those in the clan. It was said that their ancestor was the Martial God of War. Yi Futian nodded slightly. Among those present, there were some powerful Ren Huang, who were the only ones that could pose a real threat to them. In that case, let's not interact with one another, and we will each take our own. The cultivators of Yuanyang clan also proclaimed as they started walking forward, stepping into the temple. All the cultivators began to move one after another. Many of them now entered the spatial sacred hall. Next to Yi Futian, many looked at him for a cue. When they saw Yi Futian walking towards the interior, many followed suit. This spatial sacred hall was extremely vast. It was filled with space will of the way everywhere. The endless space divine light turned the space into countless segments. And as soon as they stepped into it, they could clearly feel the strong and arrogant breath from inside. Many divine implements and weapons had mighty breaths permeating amongst them. What do you want? Yi Futian asked the people around him. As many as possible, we are not picky, Do Zhao responded honestly. Get the hell away. Yi Futian looked at this brazen man next to him. As such, he wasn't picky either. Some of those who were around were a little speechless when they heard Yi Futian's words. Although there was a treasure trove inside with many divine items, were they so easy to obtain? It was extremely difficult to crack even one of the seals. And Yi Futian was asking what his people wanted? Could he get whatever his heart desired? There is an axe over there. Yu Sheng, why don't we get that for you to chop some wood? Yi Futian said. Chop wood? Do blinked. Clearly, he did not know the story of how Yu Sheng used to chop wood at the cottage on the mountain. Yu Sheng nodded. He was really not picky at all, as long as it was suitable for his explosive power. And the battle axe sounded like a match made in heaven. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.